Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the 2016 State of the Industry webinar. I'm Jonathan Sweet, the Editor-in-Chief of Boating Industry, and I'll be moderating today's discussion. Today's webinar will be recorded and available at boatingindustry.com/webinars if you'd like to see it again after the webinar. Today we're here to share some market intelligence and data with you, and we've got three industry experts to do that. First, we have Vicki Yu of the National Marine Manufacturers Association, Peter Houseworth from Infolink, and Noel Lays from Spader Business Management. All the attendees are in listen-only mode, but if you have questions, you can ask those through the GoToMeeting module there on your screen. So after they speak, we'll answer your questions, but you can submit those at any time through the module on your screen. This webinar is, of course, the companion piece to our annual market data book. If you're a subscriber to the magazine, it's included in your subscription, and if you haven't gotten it yet, it'll be coming in the mail soon. It's also available in the digital resources section of our website, boatingindustry.com, and the direct address is right there on your screen. Now with that, I'm going to hand it off to Vicki, and she will start our first part of the presentation. Vicki, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today, and let me try to take control. And I see, there we go. Thank you. All right, here's a look at new boat sales over the years, and what I'd like to point out is that while we're not selling back at levels we were during the 80s and 90s, we've been in solid recovery. Sales have been rising for the past 5 consecutive years, and I'm expecting we'll end 2016 up another 5 to 7%. In fact, we're actually trending higher than that at the moment, with advanced data indicating that through May, we were up 7.5%, and if we include PWCs in the mix, the number goes up to 9%. And here we go. Here's a look at unit sales across the various segments. Outboard engine sales data comes in 5 to 10 days after the close of each month, and it makes a nice leading indicator on where new boat sales will end up. At the end of last year, outboard engine sales reached a post-recession unit high of 238,000. That was up 9%, and growth was led by higher powered engines, which were the 300 horsepower bands were up 25% year over year. In trailers, we saw an 8.5% gain in sales, which is a positive, as 95% of the boats out there are small trailerable boats. Unit sales were up across nearly all the new powerboat segments, with sales of outboard boats that represent the largest boat segment up 8%. 4 out of 5 traditional powerboats sold are outboards. Nearly 55,000 PWCs were sold in 2015. That was up 15% from 2014. And with an average price of $11,200, it's a gateway to boating. Sterndrive boat sales continue to lag, but the pace of decline is moderating. Sales were down 7% last year, 8% the year before, and 9% the year before that. The previous slide looked at unit sales, and this one looks at dollars. What's interesting here is that while 1 in 10 new boats sold are inboard and sterndrive cruisers, they represent nearly half of all new boat sales in terms of dollars because of their higher price points. Total sales on new boats was $8.6 million in 2015, which was up 5% from 2014. This slide shows pre-owned and new boat sales over time, and the good news is that they're both growing. New boat sales, the blue line, have been growing on average about 5% annually for the past 4 years, while pre-owned boat sales have been growing at a more moderate pace during the same period. We saw a 3.7% uptick last year in sales of pre-owned boats, which was primarily reflecting an increase in sales of pre-owned towboats. And together, new and pre-owned boat sales total $15.9 billion in 2015. This slide shows pre-owned, and this is a chart from the MRAA Pulse report that came out last week, which surveyed marine retailers on their comfort with current inventory levels. This shows that new boat inventories have returned to a more balanced level, and that pre-owned inventories remain very lean. There's not much selection out there for late model year pre-owned boats because there wasn't much production going on during those years, 2008, 2009, 2010. And we're seeing now demand driving manufacturer production with that just-in-time inventory. This is consistent with what we're seeing in wholesale shipments. Shipments are growing, but we're seeing a slight slowdown in the pace of growth in the first half of 2016 compared to the previous 6 months. That's consistent with what we saw in the previous slide as well, with a slight buildup in inventory in the second half of 2015 and moderating through 2016 to a more balanced level today. It's also in line with what ITR have forecasted in late 2015, which is good news that no one's trying to stuff the pipeline, and we're seeing that shipments picked up 3.5% in June, according to the latest MSR. Here's a look at unit sales today by segment as a percentage of what they were at their peaks, with segment ranked left to right from high to low volume. What we see is that most high volume boat types are at 70% or more of what they were at their respective peaks. Unit sales of small aluminum fishing boats are 82% of what they were at their peak, and pontoons are the highest they've ever been. Here's a look at consumer confidence, and sometimes I get asked how sustainable is continued growth as we're 70 months into the cycle. Well, if we look at consumer confidence trends historically, previous expansion cycles were 96 months and 82 months. So that makes expansion beyond 70 months plausible. And here we're seeing a strengthening in sales of both RVs and boats. RVIA reported that wholesale shipments are expected to reach a quarter-century high in 2017, and boats typically follow trend. I've been asked why other power sport sectors may not be seeing this type of growth, and I think it comes down to a choice between money spent on family versus money spent on self. RVs and boats are recreational activities that the entire family can benefit from. Here's a look at the latest data through the first quarter of this year from Infolink, and we're seeing 7 to 9% growth in the high-volume outboard boat segments and continued strength in the towboat and jet boat segments, which, while low in volume, are up double digits. And these are the top 10 states in terms of spending on new boats, and as you can see, there was 5 to 12% growth across all states, except for Louisiana, who have been hit with floods. Last summer, there was a massive flood of the Red River, and I'm sure you've seen the recent news coverage of the current flooding going on in the Baton Rouge area. What we've been hearing from dealers is that weather's been good in other parts of the country, and that's what's driving sales. Confidence and sentiments are also up. Marine Retailer Sentiment Index are at the series highs on both assessments of current conditions and on 3 to 5 year outlooks. Consumer confidence was at 97.3 in July, which was steady after rebounding in June, and it's up 6 points from a year ago. And we look at confidence mainly as an indicator for how spending will go. And according to the latest GDP report, consumer spending is up. That's the bright blue bar, and it was the bright spot in our economy last quarter that helped to offset declines in business investments and fixed inventory. And those declines might suggest that there's some cautious spending among business leaders. At an annualized rate, consumer spending was up 4.2% in Q2 and has been growing at more than 2% for a while now, which is a positive. And here is a look at the inflation rate, which also remains at historical lows. And ITR Economics, who we commissioned to run a forecast model, is predicting that there's another 2 years of solid growth ahead of us. Gas prices right now are also at historical lows, and that's good for transportation of boats, the use of boats, and the production of boats. All positives for our industry. And a lot of what I've talked about today can be found in the NMMA report. And if you have any additional questions, be happy to answer them offline or during the Q&A. So back to you, Jonathan.
All right, thank you, Vicki. As Vicki said, we will take questions at the end, but feel free to ask those. At any time through the module through the GoToMeeting control panel there. And at this point, we're going to go ahead and hand it over to Peter Houseworth over at InfoLink, and he will. Whoops, sorry, Peter, I just advanced your slide for you. Peter will take over to talk some more about some of the trends they're seeing over there. Go ahead, Peter.
We'd like to take the time that we have, just a few minutes, to cover a couple of quick topics. We want to take a retrospective look at 2015 results for new boat sales. While not technically part of the market data book, we also thought everyone would be interested in seeing results through June of 2016. Next, we'd like to, not to beat a dead horse, but we'd like to visit again the dynamics of the aging boating population. It still continues to be a factor for our industry, as well as others. And then lastly, update on, the folks from boating industry asked us to update some information on the aging of the fleet, the vessels in circulation, and we're going to touch on that as well. On 2015, we basically are seeing our fourth consecutive year of year-over-year growth, which has been running in the mid to high single digits, and for 2015 was slightly less than 9%. As you look across all of the different propulsion types, we've seen growth in all except with the exception of stern drive, which is continuing to decline. We thought that might be coming to an end, but it looks like it's not over till it's over. With respect to boat types within these propulsion categories, the bright spots continue to be the bright spots that have been present for some time now. With PWCs, pontoons, saltwater fish, ski, and jet boats all contributing to the positive growth factors. Looking geographically, growth was relatively evenly spread across the country, which is a good sign in that it's a broad-based recovery. Even in those few states, as you can see in the states that are appearing in red, even those that did decline, the decline, relative on a percentage basis was relatively small, the low single digits. So, overall, it's a good broad-shouldered recovery. One thing that we did notice is small boats under 20 feet, and this is looking at everything that's registered with the exception of PWCs. Boats under 20 feet, while they are up, they do continue to lag, registering growth rates of about 5.5%, which is about half of boats of the growth we experienced in boats that are larger than 20 feet. This seems to be, in spite of efforts, I think, on the part of a number of OEMs to deliver more affordable products, particularly aimed at the small boat market. That does not necessarily mean that that hasn't been successful. Had that not taken place, perhaps that number would have been 1% or actually in decline. So it's not necessarily that it's not a opinion that it's not working. It's just that this particular segment continues to lag relative to recovery. Peeling this back just a little bit further, we also separated and looked at the size ranges across a variety of categories. And as you can see, the first saltwater fish, the category overall did very well in 2015. But again, the growth was primarily driven by boats that are larger than 20 feet. The same was also present for freshwater fish. While it's not quite as pronounced, clearly it's growing more slowly than boats that are over 20 feet. And lastly, on pontoon boats, it was a little bit more evenly distributed of the under 20 versus the over 20. However, it's a much smaller market, with less than 10% of the pontoon boat market value being under 10%, relative to the total market. So next, we're going to take a quick look at June results 2016. The basic trends that we've seen in place remain so. We have seen some strengthening. If you look at sales being up about 10% across all categories for the first for the period ended June of 2016. That compares with about 7.5% at this time last year. So the first, and particularly with the strength in the first part of the selling season this year, has put us in good stead so far.
Hey, Peter, I'm going to interrupt for just a second because we just got a question very specific to the previous screen. I'm going to go back there. One of our listeners asked what the colors mean on the bar chart, so if you could explain that for everybody.
Yeah, it's basically it's just a graphic representation of the propulsion category. So you can see basically for 2016, 159,000 outboard units. That's the large blue, and it just gives you some relative size across the various different propulsion categories. As we've noted over the last few years, the boating population has been aging rapidly. We looked at a few generally grouped it together. I mean, as a whole, that has been an issue, and we took a look at it across some generalized categories, and we can see that there are different dynamics as we look at different segments of the market. First, on your left, it's interesting that both salt and freshwater fish more recently are not aging as rapidly as they were. It's kind of interesting that just fishing in general, saltwater and freshwater being kind of different animals, they're both following this pattern. Secondly, what we call our kind of general recreation boats, which are going to include fiberglass runabouts, small cruisers, cruisers yachts, and the aluminum pontoons. We just kind of call those because you can do any number of activities. We just call them generalized recreation. There we still have an issue. That is, it continues to that new boat buyer population continues to age, and that has not abated as we've seen in salt and these fishing category. The only exception to that being pontoon. But even still, to kind of put it in perspective, new boat buyers being 56 years old is older than historically what we've seen. And then lastly, we created a kind of a specialty recreation category as well. Here the dynamics are basically a little bit different. Both the ski and PWC buyers do tend to be younger, and we think that's basically driven by two things. One is it's a physically demanding, more demanding segment of our industry, as well as that's an activity. Those activities are very common among households with teenage children. So those kind of tend to drive those categories, or the people that are active in those categories, kind of tends to drive them there. Sailors, well, they've always been older, and that hasn't changed. And lastly, like the people that are buying them, the fleet itself does continue to age. There's a number of different factors, but generally speaking, this part of the equation bodes well for the accessories manufacturers and basically anyone involved in the repair and replacement market, because as we all know, nothing on boats ever breaks. So we think that'll bode well for everybody from engines to bilge pumps to canvas to what it takes to maintain boats in an active current status. And that's all I have.
Great, Peter. Thank you. All right, we're going to go ahead and turn control here over to Noel. He's going to have the next section. And again, Noel is with Spader Business Management. They do a lot of work with some of the top dealers in the country, and they have a lot of great information from those dealers. So, Noel, please take it away.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thanks again to Boating Industry for holding the webinar and inviting us to participate. It's always exciting to take a look back at some of the trends that are happening in the industry and be able to share them with the dealers. I thought today I would share a few of the slides from the market data book and talk about them in general. The first one that I've pulled up is the new boat sales, and so just a reminder that this information is the gathering of the information from the marine dealers across the U.S. and Canada who submit data to Spader as part of our 20 group or management link or multi-location, or just to be a part of our trends information. So we're looking at our new boat sales for the last 10 years. We see the pattern there. Since 2010, each year we've had some steady growth up to 2015, where we're about 6.5 million. Not quite to the level where we were at the peak in 2007, but headed that direction. My next slide, I wanted to put, because we're always wondering what's happening with inventory, so I put the chart of the new boat inventory next to the new boat sales, and you can see, as you would expect, remarkably, the graph is pretty similar. That as the new boat sales is growing, our new boat inventory has grown. And in fact, if what we're showing since the low point, 109% growth in new boat sales, we've had 105% growth in new boat inventory. This is the inventory at the end of each of the years. So the good news about that is, with the sales growth exceeding the inventory growth, it means that we've had slightly better inventory turnover than previously. So that's positive news. The next thing I wanted to look at, and sales is nice, but profitability is really the most important. And so this is a graphic of the profitability of the marine dealers who've reported to us over the last 10 years. In 2015, the good news over the last 10, actually 11 years, the profitability that the average dealer reported at 4.3% of sales is the highest that it's been in all of those years. And this slide, and I overlay the red and the yellow and the green. I did that to indicate the Spader guidelines. So we at Spader, we talk a lot about survival net. Typically, survival net is between 3 and 3.5% of sales, and what that means is that's the net profit percent that we believe a marine dealer needs to earn in order to be an ongoing business, to be able to pay all the bills and invest at a survival level in the business to keep it ongoing. And so the yellow bar indicates the survival net. You can see that was it 1, 2, 3, 4 of the years dealers were in that survival net area. 6 of the years in that downturn that we experienced, they were below survival net. And now in 2015 at 4.3, and actually probably 2012, those were the 2 years in the last 10 or 11 years that dealers had earned a net profit according to the Spader guidelines that would put them outside of that survival net, would allow them to invest in their businesses and their people and their fixed assets and things like that to continue to grow their businesses. So 2015, that's really good news to get up out of that survival net area. And the question is, you know, how do we keep it there? We talked about, you heard earlier in the webinar about some upcoming years of growth, and we believe that, we agree with that. We believe that's going to happen. So how do we capitalize on that? So I think there are a couple of opportunities that we see when I talk to our dealers and attend our 20 group meetings. One has to do with margins, and so this chart shows the pattern of gross margin on new boat sales for the last 10 years, and you can see in 2015 the average margin on new boats ended the year at 16.8%, which was down the lowest average margin in 6 years. And that's what we're hearing a lot in our 20 group meetings and visiting with dealers about the pressure, the downward pressure on margins, harder and harder to earn margins, particularly on new units. So once again, I want to put next to the new margins, I put a graph of the used boat margins. And you can see in 2015, the used margins ended the year at 17.5% was the average margin on used. That's up from the last couple of years. But the point that I wanted to make by putting these side by side is typically with our more profitable dealers, we see a wider range, a wider gap between the new margins and the used margins. Used margins typically are running 3 to 5% higher than new margins, and the reason for that is with used, typically the customer doesn't have anything exactly like that to compare to, and What I think there's an opportunity in that the average use margin we don't have that 3 to 5% gap in use margins there for the average dealer. But on my next slide, I took a look. I pulled out our 20% most profitable dealers, and I compared their used margins to the average dealer. And we break it down into 3 categories: dealers under $6 million worth of annual sales. The average used margin there for all the dealers, the best of the best and the worst of the worst, is 19.4% on used. But when I look at the most profitable dealers in that category, their margin on used was 22.2. So there I'm seeing that 3 to 5% range, gap that we typically see with our more profitable dealers. In the 6 to 10 million category, the same pattern. The average used margin for best of the best and the worst of the worst, 16.3, compared to 23.3% margin for the most profitable dealers in that category. And then in the dealers that are over $10 million worth of sales, we don't quite see that gap there, but it's still a little bit higher. The average used margin 17.1. The more profitable dealers were at 17.9. So one of the areas where I believe there's an opportunity is in the area of used margin, particularly when we looked at some of the slides earlier that Vicki was presenting, where the used inventory is tight and not available. Those are opportunities for us to earn additional gross margin dollars. My next slide, again, looking for how do we capitalize on this period of growth that we're in right now. How do we make the most of it? I wanted to take a look at some of our key expense ratios. And so the first one is personnel expense. It's typically the biggest expense ratio, where the average dealer spends most of their dollars. And this is a track for the last 10 years of the average personnel expense ratio for all marine dealers that submitted numbers. And you can see back in 2008, 2009, the high of 51, almost 52 points. That ratio has come down in 2015 to 46.2. But again, I wanted to, we have Spader guidelines I wanted to overlay, and so the green area that's the good area. If you can keep your personnel expense ratio in the green area, that's a good area. The yellow area, again, is like the survival net. So if all of your expense ratios were in the yellow area, you'd end up with that 3 to 3.5% survival net. And then the red area is above it. That's too high of an expense ratio. So I have to admit, when I put this together, I looked at the plot. I thought, oh gosh, maybe the Spader personnel expense ratio needs to be modified. So once again, I took a look at the 20% most profitable marine dealers that reported their numbers, and let me plug that in. So here's the chart of the 20% most profitable. And so there you can see in 2015, the most profitable dealers were down, approaching that green area, 38.8 for a personnel expense ratio. During 2008, 2009, like many other dealers, they got up into the red area, 46.9, 46.4, and then they took some actions, whatever they needed to do to drive down that expense ratio to a low of 33.6 in 2012. And from working with the dealers and being in the 20 group meetings, I can recall in 2012 they were pretty lean, and many dealers, said, we've got to hire some more staff. I need to grow because I just can't continue operating with the light and lean personnel that I have. So we see that they did bring some people back. But it is possible. The Spader guidelines on personnel expense are possible, and the most profitable dealers are proving that out. Our next expense ratio. Before we get to that, so what drives that personnel expense ratio down more than anything is the average AI available income, or it's of average gross margin, gross profit per employee. So I just went back 3 years, 2013, 2014. Baseline, our average AI per employee. For every employee that a marine dealer employed, each employee contributed $126,468 worth of gross profit to the dealership. In 2014 and 2015, that average went to $134,635. So every employee contributed. The change was 6.5%. So every employee increased their contribution to gross profit by 6.5%. And then in 2015 and 2016, we saw a similar 6.4%, and to the average AI per employee is 143,186. That's a key metric. I would encourage everyone to calculate your number. What is the AI per employee, and more importantly, what's your trend? The more profitable dealers are getting more done with fewer people, or earning additional AI gross profit dollars with the same people. That's the trend that we see here, and I would encourage you to study and measure your AI per employee. Now on to a few of our other expense ratios. This is the advertising expense ratio, and I'm going to put the Spader guidelines over there. So now we see that there's no red area in here. The good news is that in the last 10 years, dealers have been able to keep their advertising ratio, at least in the yellow area, and 2015, we can see 3.9, 2012, 3.9 is down in the green area. We look at our floor plan interest. And we all know that we've been enjoying historically low interest rates. And when I apply the Spader guidelines, we can see that because of those low interest rates, it's been fairly easy to keep your floor plan interest expense ratio. As I'm consulting with dealers, and I'm continually telling them, if your floor plan interest expense ratio is out of line right now, then something's terribly wrong, because we haven't had these low interest rates for a long time, and it's not likely that they'll stay around forever. So we should be that 3 to 4 extra points that we're able to save on floor plan interest. If we're managing our dealership right, they should fall to the bottom line. And we look at variable expense ratio, and I'll apply the Spader guidelines there. We can see that for the most part, dealers have been in that survival net area, in the yellow area. 3 years after the downturn, they were high, but they managed those down and been pretty steady in this particular area. Lastly is our fixed expense ratio, and again we see similar trend that we saw with the variable or the semi-fixed expense ratio, has experienced some highs in the 2008-2009, but as we are growing our sales and our gross margin, that number is coming down. In the market data book, we had some slides comparing May of 2015 to May of 2016. Those are the numbers that we had available at that time. And I thought it would be good to do a little bit of an update. So I pulled the June numbers to see, because we saw some pretty significant growth at that time and at the end of May. So this chart shows from May of 2015 to May of 2016 on 4 categories. new boat sales, used boat sales, service, and parts. We saw significant growth through May. When I looked at the June numbers, we still see some growth, but that growth has slowed. Still nice growth, but not at the level of growth that we reported with the May numbers. And then just this morning, I pulled up the July numbers. They're not, I won't have the final July in for another week or so, but I checked the preliminary July numbers just this morning to see, and preliminarily for July, so July of 2016 compared to July of 2015, on new boat sales, dealers reported a 14% increase, so almost the same as it was the end of June. On used boats, 13.2, so again, that's very similar. Service department was down significantly at 4.4% increase over July. So again, these are preliminary, so I don't know where that will end up, but saw a dip in service in July. And then parts, where we were running a 6% increase at the end of June, it's 4.3% at the end of July, so slowed down a little bit. And that is my report. Back to you, Jonathan.
Great, Noel. Thank you. And we're going to go ahead and take your questions now. And one thing a few people have asked, if you missed the beginning here, the webinar will be archived. Should be up by the end of the day. If not, certainly it'll be up tomorrow at boatingindustry.com/webinars. So I'm going to go ahead and take a few of our questions. Again, if you have a question for our panel, please ask it through the question module there on your GoToWebinar panel. Let's see here. This one specifically goes back to your information, Noel, about how many dealerships does the data represent that you guys are reporting?
It's about 150 to 175.
Okay, great. All right, we have another question here from one of our viewers. They were wondering if you guys know the average age of a first-time boat buyer. I don't know, Peter, if you have any of that information, or Vicki, is that anything you guys have found through your work?
Yeah, we have. We've looked at that, and it really doesn't seem to vary that much new versus a repeat boat buyer. So first-time boat buyers generally are running in the 50 to 55 year age range. Which, I mean, to us, find it has gotten older, just like boaters in general, over the years. That has also been increasing relative to first-time buyers. But I think the thing that's kind of remarkable there is, of all the different sports and activities that are out there, be it motorcycles, be it golf, be it any number of other things, that's really late in life to be picking up a new sport. And it's just an observation. It also means that obviously there's there at some point you can't do it anymore. And luckily we've been blessed with many advances in terms of the technology of boating to make it more accessible to people later in life. When you look at and I think if you go back into some of the boating industry archives, we've published some information specifically on this point about first-time boat buyers and their ages, but we're also getting kind of a buffer effect from people boating much later in life, that they continue to boat well into their 80s, whereas if you went back 15, 20, 30 years ago, it basically stopped at 65 or 70. So we're getting that kind of the active senior set is giving us a little bit of a buffer here. But that doesn't take away from the fact that first-time boaters are much older than you would think, and much older than we would like, because we would like to be able to market to them longer.
Right. And this is really for everyone. This is a kind of a complex question, but if you can give it a few quick thoughts, maybe. One of our attendees wanted to know about kind of how is the industry doing in selling, and what are they doing to sell new and used boats to Hispanics? Obviously, been a topic of conversation for quite a while now. What are some of the, and so what are you guys seeing in that regard, and what have been the reasons for success, and maybe for reasons we're not being successful? Don't all jump in at once.
Well, it's kind of a hard thing to give an opinion. I mean, I know that both Discover Boating as well as the RBFF, the Recreational Boating and Fishing Foundation, have increased their efforts. You know, part of our business is also direct marketing, and I can say that, you know, from our perspective, we've seen very little to no activity relative to specific Hispanic targeting. From a consumer standpoint, but we do. I mean, we hear the dialogue a lot, and we know that it's a growing segment of the population. It's underrepresented in boating, but I don't see a lot of meat on the bones in terms of you know, actual activities taking place to specifically address that market.
And the only thing that I would add to that is, and our marketing folks can probably speak to this more in depth than we do, than I can, but what we've done for the Discover Boating campaign is to tweak some of our visual advertising to become more inclusive. We're still not really directly targeting the Hispanic population, but the imagery that you might see in some of the advertising, whereas before it was more centered around the Caucasian family. Now there's more ethnic minorities being represented in some of that visual imagery, so that those prospective boat buyers don't feel isolated and can feel connected to boating. So and some other folks have maybe made a play for Spanish language advertising, and we haven't done that so much with the Discover Boating campaign, because we find that a lot of those folks that are watching the Spanish media are also doing the same thing to the English media channel. So we're kind of leaning towards more of an inclusive type of marketing strategy.
Okay. Noel, this one is more specific to you. We had a couple questions about the personnel expense ratio, and I think you can probably answer both of them together, but the first one was personnel expense ratio is a ratio of what? And then does the personnel expense ratio include sales and service revenue?
So the personnel expense ratio is a percentage of your personnel expenses, which includes other personnel. So it would include payroll taxes and fringe benefits and anything in addition to wages and bonuses and compensation. So it's a total of your personnel expenses as a percentage of your gross profit, your gross profit dollars. And what was the second part to that question, Jonathan?
If it included the sales and service revenue.
Yes. It includes all revenue from the dealership. So new and used, unit sales, F&I, service revenue, and parts and accessory sales.
Okay, great. We have one of our listeners wondering if you guys are seeing financial institution lenders open up their financing more to help increase the number of marine units sold. Any trends you guys are seeing in the financing area?
I don't have any information on that, no.
Peter or Vicki, anything you guys have seen?
No, I mean, likewise, the direct, information relative to, financing, except that if your credit's good, you can probably get a loan.
I'd probably refer that caller to the National Marine Lenders Association. I know they put out an annual report on financing trends. That might be something useful to them.
Okay, great. So yeah, that's the National Marine Lenders Association. That report, every year when they put it out, we do put it out on our website, but also I believe it's available right off of their website as well. Let's see. We have another question here. One of our listeners is wondering why we're seeing stern drive sales lag the market, and is that because other types of boats are stealing sales, especially sport boats?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. I think it's I mean, the stern drive market has traditionally been dominated by smaller fiberglass boats, and as we touched on during the presentation, that segment of the market. I mean, and I actually was looking at some of the numbers, going back historically. That fiberglass stern drive market, 10 or 12 years ago, was in the order of 55,000 units a year. We're now at 12. So obviously it's contracted greatly. And I think that's part of the challenges that we're faced with is that's what tended to drive the stern drive market to a large degree from a unit volume standpoint was these kind of entry-level boaters who were coming in and it's their first boat, and this is what got them out on the water. They didn't they weren't enthusiasts from a particular aspect of being fishing or any of the other ski boats versus just kind of that general family recreation. And that's part of the problem that we're facing is that buyer hasn't come back. We're still very challenged with finding these younger, entry-level buyers, and I think that's really what's driving that scenario.
Okay. Another person was wondering if we have if the panel has a sense of how sales are trending overall for parts, accessories, and clothing, noting that, of course, some dealers make more profit on those than they do on new boat sales.
Well, I would just add what we're seeing on one of the last slides that I showed. Parts and accessories sales are up over a year ago at the same time, 5 to 6%, and typically the margins are higher. The margins are higher, but for our dealers, even the dealers that do well in parts and accessories, the total parts and accessories represent a small amount of their total sales for our dealers. There's always an exception, but we say as unit sales go, so goes the dealership for most of our clients, because unit sales represent 70 to 75%. So it's in parts, again, for our clients, typically trail. If unit sales are up, parts and accessory sales will be up. If unit sales are down, parts and accessory sales are down. So overall, from year to year through July, we're seeing about a 5 to 6% increase in parts and accessory sales.
And we're also seeing similar figures too for aftermarket accessory sales. In 2015, our estimate was up 5.6% on aftermarket accessory sales, and that includes all types of aftermarket accessories. And I think the total sales volume on that was around $6 billion.
Okay. So another question here is, what does the new model development world look like with the boat builders, and are they investing in new product? We're certainly seeing a lot of that. It seems like here at Boating Industry that we're getting a lot of new product information, but I certainly would like to hear what the panel has to say as well.
Who'd like to start? I mean, we look at it like everyone else. I mean, as being active in the industry, I mean, it's critically important. I mean, I've seen, many of the developments, obviously, with the things that are growing now, particularly pontoon boats, where there's been more and more content, and they're basically, it's almost like a crossover vehicle that, there are elements of other boating categories that have been incorporated into pontoons, and probably the other way as well. I mean, the only other thing I would mention is, with respect to the ski boat industry, which has always been just totally dominated by new product development, and that has to do with not only the technology, but that particular aspect of that category in particular has morphed over time. That finally started out with your ski boat, and then all of a sudden it was wake surfing, and then it's or wakeboarding, and then wake surfing, and things getting more and more extreme. Well, the performance characteristics required to do these different things change, and therefore requires a continual evolution of new product development. And we've looked at model level information for that specific segment of the industry, and it is so clear that the new models have driven year in and year out, have always driven that market. But I think the industry overall, in the process of trying to improve improve our collective lot, has put a great deal of time and effort into making boating more affordable, to make it more comfortable for more people, to address things that make it make boating a better experience, with the objective of retaining customers, not only winning new customers but retaining customers as well. So I think it's a multifaceted topic. It's something that I think many companies in the industry are working hard at.
All right. A couple questions here about average buyer age that I wanted to throw out to you guys. You probably, maybe Peter answer, maybe you'll be the best one to answer them. But the first is, if we have any data on the average age of the first time used boat buyer. And the second one is, again, about new boats, but is the average age of new boaters consistent across the U.S., or are we seeing different regions starting to boat at different ages?
No, I'd say, I mean, first, I'll take your second question first, and then we'll go back. I mean, no, it's a nationwide observation that it doesn't vary that much, relative to geography. We haven't looked at it recently, but a couple of years ago we took a hard look at it, and we basically found no difference. It's the same age group is buying both new and pre-owned, and in fact, the whole decision about new versus pre-owned doesn't appear to be influenced by age at all. So I guess the short answer is no. That's age is not a determinant of new versus used buyer.
Okay. Well, it looks like we are about out of time, so I want to thank our panelists for participating in today's discussion, and I hope all the listeners found it as educational as I did. Again, a reminder, this webinar will be archived at boatingindustry.com/webinars, where you'll be able to download it and watch it there to get so if you missed anything or just want to share this with any of your colleagues. I know we've got a couple of questions we didn't get to, so what we will do is actually try to answer some of those questions offline, and if we can, we will post those responses right there with the archived webinar. So again, thank you for listening today. This is Jonathan Sweet at Boating Industry, and on behalf of our panelists, I want to thank you once again for joining us today. Thanks, and have a great day.